We're leaving the country. I sold your house. Goodbye. Those were the first words out of Lorian's mouth, no greeting, no hesitation. Before I could even form a response, the line went dead. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the phone still warm in my hand. The world suddenly too still. It took a moment for the meaning to land. And when it did, my chest tightened like a vice. A hard knock rattled the front door. 2 county officers stood there, their uniforms pressed, expressions unreadable. One held out a manila envelope. "Ma'am, you have 48 hours to vacate the premises," he said. I took the papers. Scanning the bold print, "Notice to vacate. Court order. Sale completed." The letters blurred for a moment before snapping back into focus. My knees felt unsteady, but I forced my spine straight. "I understand," I murmured, though I didn't. When the officers left, I called Lorian back. No answer. Again, straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed a message from Maurice, his wife. "Nothing personal. It's just business. Business." That was what they were calling it now. Outside, the faint squeak of a screen door made me glance up. Grelda, my neighbor of 15 years, was watching from her porch. Her brow furrowed. She crossed the patch of lawn quickly. "What happened?" she asked, eyes flicking to the papers in my hand. I swallowed hard. "I need to make a call," I told her. My voice sounded calm. Even though my pulse was hammering, Grelda hesitated, as if wanting to press for more, but simply nodded and stepped back toward her house. I stared down at the papers again. If Lorian thought he'd taken everything from me. He'd forgotten one thing, something he'd never known existed. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in years, my late husband's attorney. Halden Muir answered on the 3rd ring, his voice steady and deliberate, just as I remembered. "Selvara, it's been a long time. I wouldn't be calling unless it mattered," I said, my fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen table. "Lorian claims he sold my house. I just received eviction papers." There was a brief pause. Then the rustle of paper. "Fax me the documents. Now." I walked to the small desk in the corner, slid the papers into the machine, and waited for the tone to signal they'd gone through. The minutes stretched until the phone rang again. "Your son made a serious mistake," Halden said. "He sold the structure, but not the land. The land is held in a private trust your husband created before he passed. You're the sole trustee, without your written authorization. The sale is incomplete and illegal." I felt my lungs expand fully for the first time since the morning call. "So the buyer doesn't actually own anything." "Not legally," he confirmed. "And the documents they used to push the sale through forged. The notary stamp isn't registered in this state. I'll be sending this to the district attorney today." My pulse steadied. "Can they be stopped before they leave the country if we move fast?" "Yes. I'll need permission to act on your behalf." "You have it," I said without hesitation. I heard the click of his pen. "I'll also contact airport security. If they're flagged for the real estate fraud, they won't get past the gate." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his words settle in. For hours I'd been standing on the edge of a cliff, convinced the ground had given way. Now, I realized there was solid rock beneath me, and it was Lorian who had stepped into open air. "Halden," I said, my voice even, "make sure this is handled by the book. I want no doubts about what they've done." "You'll have your proof," he replied, when the call ended. I set the phone down and folded the eviction notice neatly, sliding it back into its envelope. The clock was ticking, but now it was ticking for them. By the next morning, Halden had already called twice. The first time was to confirm the district attorney's office had received the forged documents. The second was to tell me they'd traced Lorian's travel plans, 2 one-way tickets to Lisbon. Departure at 9:20 a.m. Out of Logan. I sat at the kitchen table, listening as he explained that airport security and local police had been alerted. They'll intercept them before boarding. He said, "Stay by the phone." So I did. Every tick of the clock was a hammer in my chest. At 8:37 a.m., my phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Grelda. Check this link. It opened to a blog post from a local travel writer who often posted candid photos from the airport. Embedded at the top was a shaky video crowds shuffling in line, luggage wheels clicking against the tile. And then I saw them. Lorien. His arm draped over Maurice's shoulder, both of them pulling sleek suitcases, the kind they'd never owned before. 3 uniformed officers moved in fast, surrounding them before they reached the check-in counter. One officer took Lorien's passport. Another gestured for Maurice to step aside. I couldn't hear the words over the background noise, but I saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched as he tried to argue. A bystander holding a phone captured the moment they were each led to opposite sides of the terminal. The video followed the officers until they disappeared through a restricted door. The final frame lingered on the suitcases, now abandoned near the counter. I set the phone down and sat very still. This wasn't satisfaction I was feeling, it was something sharper. A truth cutting through any wishful hope I'd once held. My son wasn't just careless. He had gambled with my life, and he'd done it without hesitation. The phone rang again. Halden's voice was brisk. "They're in custody. We'll know more after questioning." I thanked him, then hung up, my gaze falling to the eviction envelope still lying on the table. I slid it into the drawer, closed it, and let my hand rest there. Whatever happened next, I intended to see it through to the very end. By late afternoon, Halden called with an update. "They've both been interviewed separately," he said. "Your son is blaming Maurice. She's blaming him." I could almost picture it, 2 people cornered, clawing at each other to climb out first. "What did they say exactly?" I asked. "Lorien claims Maurice convinced him you didn't need the house anymore. Says she told him you'd already agreed to sell and even signed off. Maurice says Lorien told her you were moving to a retirement condo and had given him permission to handle the sale." The lie was as cleanly rehearsed as it was absurd, and the documents proven forgeries. Halden said, "The notary stamp is fake. The signature doesn't match your records, and there's no trustee authorization. They can't spin this one into anything legitimate." I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle. For years, I had told myself that Lorien's sharp edges came from bad influences, from people who used him. Now, I could see how easily he used that same reasoning on others. That night, I made myself a simple dinner and ate in silence. The house felt heavier than usual, the air dense with the echo of old arguments and unspoken doubts. I pulled an album from the shelf and flipped through pages of photographs, birthdays, graduations, summers on the porch. His smile was there in every picture, easy and wide, looking straight into the camera. I wondered when it had become just another performance. Halden had said the arraignment would be scheduled soon. I told him I wouldn't be attending. Seeing them in cuffs at the airport had been enough. I didn't need the theater of a courtroom. What I needed was distance and the clarity to decide what came next. Before bed, I gathered the eviction papers, the forged documents Halden had sent copies of, and slid them all into a folder marked with the date. I placed it in the desk drawer, locking it with a small brass key. The evidence was mine now, and I intended to keep it exactly where it belonged. Halden arrived the next morning with a thick folder under his arm. He set it on my kitchen table and opened it, revealing a stack of reports, bank statements, and printed emails. The investigation moved quickly. He said, The forged documents were traced back to a cousin of Maurice, someone with a history of real estate fraud. He flipped to another section. Here's the money trail. The payment from the supposed sale was $640,000. It didn't stay in one place for long, moved through 4 domestic accounts before being wired overseas. I skimmed the statements, each transfer a neat little line item with dates and amounts. And now frozen. Halden replied, "Because the sale was never authorized. The buyer's attorneys filed their own criminal complaint. They're demanding repayment and damages. Between that and the DA's charges, your son and his wife are facing pressure from both sides." I let out a slow breath. It wasn't relief, exactly, but the shape of justice was starting to form. "And the buyer angry," Halden said plainly. "They thought they were getting a prime coastal property. Instead, they're holding a worthless contract on a building they don't own." I closed the folder and rested my hand on it. "Then we wait. We let the process work." He agreed. "And you keep every copy of this. If they try to twist the story, you'll have proof." After he left, I sat with the folder for a long time, running my fingers over the smooth cardboard. Every page inside was a record of choices each one Lorien and Maurice had made, knowing full well what it would cost me. I slipped the folder into the desk drawer beside the eviction notice. Locking it again, the sound of the key turning was oddly satisfying. A small click that told me I was still in control of something. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves along the porch. I stood there for a moment, watching them swirl, before deciding exactly how I'd use the next move that was mine to make. The call came just after noon. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. "Mom." Lorien's voice cracked on the first syllable. "I listen. I need your help. Just enough for bail. Please. I can't stay here." I didn't speak right away. His plea sat in the air between us, thick and heavy. I thought back to that morning when he'd told me, without a tremor in his voice, that my home was gone. I thought of the eviction notice, the forged signatures, the deliberate steps he'd taken, how much I asked finally. He named a figure. It wasn't outrageous, but it wasn't small either. "I'll pay you back," he said quickly, the promise tumbling out like he'd practiced it. "No," I said, steady. "I'll give you enough for bail and a place to stay for 1 month. Nothing more. After that, you're on your own." There was silence on the line, broken only by a faint exhale. "A month. Okay. Thank you." I called Halden and arranged for the funds to go directly through his office. No cash. No open accounts, nothing that could be twisted later. He assured me he'd handle the paperwork and secure a short-term rental. When it was done, I sat back in my chair. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was a line drawn in permanent ink. I wouldn't leave him to rot. But I wouldn't shield him from the weight of his own choices either. That night, I walked through each room of my house, my home. The furniture was still where it had always been. The walls still held the photographs I'd chosen. But I felt the shift inside me, a quiet, deliberate reclaiming. I closed the front door, turned the lock, and slid the chain into place. The house was mine in every way that mattered, and I intended to keep it that way. Halden called the next morning to confirm that Lorien had been released and moved into the small apartment we'd arranged. "It's furnished enough to live," he said. Nothing more. That was exactly the point. I didn't want him comfortable enough to forget the position he was in. I drove into town that afternoon. The building was old brick, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The stairwell smelled faintly of paint and dust. I knocked on the door, and after a moment, it opened. Lorien stood there looking older than his 35 years. Eyes dull, jaw unshaven, shoulders hunched like he'd been carrying weight too long. He didn't invite me in, and I didn't ask. "This is for you," I said, handing him the lease papers. Rent's paid for 1 month. After that, it's on you. He looked at the lease papers. Then at me. I know I've ruined things, he said quietly. I don't expect you to believe me. But I didn't think it would go this far. I held his gaze, searching for the boy I'd once known. It went exactly as far as the choices you made. I said, now you'll have to choose differently. We stood in the hallway a moment longer, the air thick with words that wouldn't be said. Finally, I stepped back. Take care of yourself. He nodded once. A small, almost imperceptible movement, and closed the door. On the drive home, I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't wonder if he meant what he'd said. My focus was on the road ahead, the stretch of quiet I intended to protect. When I reached the house, I set my bag down and went straight to my desk. The locked drawer still held the folder with every piece of evidence. I turned the key, opened it, and placed one more item inside the spare key to his apartment. A week later, an envelope arrived with no return address. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, slanted, and rushed. I set it on the table, staring at it for a moment before sliding a knife under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The words were uneven, as if written in haste. Silvara, I don't deserve your help, but I want you to know Maurice is gone. She took the last of the money from my account and disappeared. I'm not asking for more. I just needed to tell someone. I'm sorry. L. I read it twice, the second time slower, letting each sentence settle. There was no plea for forgiveness, no dramatic flourish, just a flat confession. I set the letter down and walked to the desk, unlocking the drawer where the folder lay. The letter joined the eviction notice, the forged contracts, and the transfer receipts, another piece of the story, preserved in black and white. The phone rang mid-afternoon. It was Halden again. I heard about Maurice. He said, word is she's left the state. Lorian's been making quiet inquiries about work, but his name's not helping him. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe that's the point. Let him find out what it's like to build without shortcuts. There was a pause. Then Halden said, you've handled this with more restraint than most. I thought about that for a moment. It wasn't restraint, it was clarity. My boundaries had become immovable because I'd seen what happened when they weren't. That evening, I cooked for one and sat at the small kitchen table. The window opened to the sound of wind moving through the trees. The house felt different now. Less like a fortress under siege and more like a place that had passed a storm. I washed the dishes slowly, dried my hands, and turned off the light. Tomorrow, I had somewhere to be. The next morning, I drove into the city to meet Halden at his office. The folder from my desk sat on the passenger seat, every document inside neatly organized. When I arrived, he was already waiting with a stack of legal papers. This is the deed transfer, he said, sliding the top page toward me. It moves the house and land into an irrevocable trust in your name, with no beneficiary clauses except those you choose. No one, not your son, not anyone can sell or mortgage it without your approval. I read each page carefully, my eyes tracing the legal language. Every line felt like a brick being laid in a wall that would never be breached again. Halden handed me a pen. Sign here. And it's done. The pen felt solid in my hand, heavier than it should have. I signed once, twice, 3 times, my signature looping across the paper with finality. When I finished, Halden gathered the pages and placed them into a fresh, labeled file. It's recorded immediately. He said, from this moment on, your home is untouchable. I nodded, feeling a steadiness settle deep in my chest. Good. Then it's time to make a few other changes. We went over my will, updating the provisions so there would be no confusion in the future. The property would remain in the trust, and any funds I left behind would bypass Lorien entirely unless he proved years of steady employment and no criminal involvement. It wasn't spite, it was protection. For me, and for the life I'd built. When the paperwork was complete, I shook Halden's hand. "Thank you for making this clean. That's what I'm here for," he replied. Driving home, I felt no triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my life was mine again, locked away behind protections no one could dismantle. As I turned onto my street, I saw a familiar figure waiting on my porch. Lorien was sitting on the top step, elbows on his knees, head bowed. When I pulled into the driveway, he stood but didn't come closer. I didn't know where else to go. He said, his voice was rough, like he hadn't slept, "I'm out of the apartment, couldn't make rent." I walked up the steps and stopped in front of him. "I told you 1 month. You knew that." He nodded, eyes fixed on the porch boards. "I've been looking for work. No one wants to hire me. I'm trying." "Mom," I studied his face. There was no arrogance left. No deflection, just the bare weight of consequence. "I can give you 1 more night," I said, finally. "There's a spare blanket inside. You can sleep on the couch. Tomorrow, you go to the shelter downtown. They have job programs. You take what they offer." His shoulders dropped. And for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of something that looked like gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured. Inside, I handed him the blanket and pointed to the couch. We didn't talk much that evening. He ate quietly, then sat staring at the floor while I read in the chair across the room. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. Before going to bed, I paused in the doorway. "You can change, Lorien, but it has to be you who does it. No one can do it for you." He gave a small nod, and I left him there, the blanket pulled up around his shoulders. The next morning, I drove him to the shelter. We didn't hug. I watched him walk inside, the door swinging shut behind him. When I got home, I unlocked my desk and opened the drawer. The folder was still there, everything in its place. I closed it gently, turned the key, and let my hand rest on it for a moment. Then I stood, walked to the front door, and stepped outside into the clear morning air.